She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You don't know what you're getting into." Most people would have walked away right then. But me? I stayed, and that decision changed everything. I wasn't supposed to be there that evening. I'd only stopped by the little corner bookstore because the rain had caught me off guard, and I needed a place to wait it out. The shop smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee, the kind of place where time seemed to stretch itself out. I wandered between the shelves, dragging my fingertips lightly across the spines, when I noticed her. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention. There was no loudness about her, no dramatic gestures. She stood quietly in the poetry section, her posture straight but relaxed, one hand tucked loosely around a book as if it already belonged to her. Something about her presence was steady. Like the hum of a song you can't place, but somehow already know by heart. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept finding her anyway. She had the kind of beauty that didn't rush at you but settled in slowly, the faint lines near her eyes, softened not by age but by laughter and life. The way her hair fell neatly around her face, brushing against the collar of her coat. There was a calm elegance in her movements, like every gesture had been measured, not because she was cautious but because she simply didn't need to hurry. At some point, she glanced up and caught me looking. For a second, I felt exposed, like I'd been caught trespassing in a place I wasn't supposed to be. But instead of frowning, she gave the smallest smile, the kind that flickers only at the corner of the mouth before it disappears again. I told myself to keep moving, to not make it obvious, but fate, or maybe just clumsiness, intervened. A book slipped from the shelf as I passed, landing near her feet. She bent down before I could, her movements unhurried, graceful, and when she handed it back to me, our fingers brushed. Just lightly. Just for a moment. But it was enough to make me feel the warmth of her skin lingering on mine, as though the briefest touch had left behind a secret only I was allowed to keep. "Here," she said, her voice low and even, carrying a calm weight that made the small bookstore feel suddenly quieter. "Thank you," I managed, though my voice sounded younger, less certain than I wanted it to. She gave another one of those fleeting smiles, then turned back toward the shelves. But I couldn't help noticing that she stayed there, within arm's reach, as if she hadn't minded the interruption. I stood with the book in my hands, pretending to read the cover, but really I was replaying the moment, her eyes meeting mine, the steadiness in her voice, the softness of her hand against my own. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But something about her made me want to. And just like that, in the quiet corner of a rain-soaked bookstore, something had shifted. I didn't expect to see her again. A chance encounter in a bookstore felt like something that should have ended the moment I stepped back into the rain. Yet a few days later there she was, sitting by the window of a small cafe I often passed on my way home. She sat with a cup of tea in front of her, the steam curling up toward her face as she slowly stirred, lost in her own world. Her presence, again, wasn't loud or commanding, but it was impossible for me not to notice. Something about her made the rest of the room seem blurred, like she existed in sharper focus than everyone else. I told myself to keep walking, but instead, my feet carried me inside. The bell over the door chimed softly as I stepped in, and her eyes lifted just long enough to recognize me. There it was again, that fleeting smile, not wide, not obvious, but enough to tell me she remembered. And somehow, that was all the encouragement I needed. I ordered a coffee, more for an excuse to stay than any real desire for caffeine, and found a seat not far from hers. The place was quiet, filled with the hum of low conversations and the clink of cups against saucers. After a few minutes of debating with myself, I turned slightly and said, "You're a fan of bookstores too, I see." She looked at me, one eyebrow lifting just a fraction. "And cafes. Though I'm guessing you're here for the same reason as before, shelter from the rain?" I glanced out the window. The streets were slick, though the rain had already stopped. "Maybe," I said with a smile. "Or maybe it's just coincidence." Her lips curved, and for the first time, I caught a fuller smile, one that reached her eyes. It felt like being invited into a private moment, one she didn't share with just anyone. Our conversation began simply enough: books, the weather, small things. But there was a rhythm to it, an ease that I didn't expect. She answered my questions carefully, as though she were used to keeping parts of herself guarded, but every so often she'd let something slip, a laugh, a sharp observation, a story from her past, and I'd catch a glimpse of the woman beneath the armor. At one point, she laughed at something I said, and her hand moved instinctively, resting lightly against my forearm as though to steady herself. The touch was brief, nothing more than a brush, but it left a warmth that spread through me far deeper than it should have. When she realized it, she pulled her hand back gently, folding her fingers around her teacup. Still, I noticed the faintest pause, the smallest hesitation, like maybe she hadn't minded the contact either. I sipped my coffee and watched the way the steam rose between us, softening the edges of the world. For a while, silence settled comfortably at our table, not awkward, not strained, but the kind of silence that said words weren't always necessary. And in that quiet, I realized something. I wanted to know more. Not just about what books she read or which tea she liked, but the kind of things she didn't share easily, the thoughts behind her measured pauses, the stories that had carved both strength and gentleness into her at once. I didn't know how long she'd let me stay in her orbit. But I knew this much: I wanted to. It was a Thursday evening when we found ourselves sitting together again, this time in the quiet corner of the same cafe. The air outside carried the chill of early autumn, and inside the glow of the lamps softened everything, making it feel almost too intimate for strangers. But by now, we weren't strangers anymore. She had ordered her usual tea. I'd started ordering the same, if only to prolong the excuse of sitting across from her. Our conversations had grown easier with each meeting. She listened more than most people did, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but really listening, her gaze steady, her silences thoughtful. I found myself wanting to fill those silences with pieces of myself I rarely shared with anyone. That night, I told her how much I admired her perspective. How she always seemed so sure of herself, even in the way she stirred her tea or chose her words. She gave me a look then, one that was calm but carried a kind of weight I hadn't felt before. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said softly. The words landed between us like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading across the quiet. I frowned a little. "What do you mean?" Her eyes didn't leave mine, though I noticed the faintest tremor in her hand as she set her cup back down. "You're young," she said, her tone steady but laced with something unspoken. "And I'm not. I've lived a lot of life already." "More than you realize. That comes with complications." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, trying to catch every shift in her expression. She wasn't pushing me away out of coldness, it was something else. Fear. Maybe even protection, not just for herself but for me. "I know what you see when you look at me," she continued, her arms folding lightly across her chest. Not defensive, but almost as if she were holding herself together. "You see someone confident, maybe even intriguing. But there are things about me you don't understand. I have history. I have scars. I'm not simple. And I can't." She paused, exhaling sharply. "I can't let you walk into that without realizing what it means." Her words should have stung, but instead, I found myself watching the way her gaze drifted toward the floor, how her voice caught ever so slightly on the last sentence. She wasn't just warning me away. She was afraid of being wanted and then abandoned. Afraid of being someone's mistake. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of her confession settle. Around us, the cafe carried on with its soft chatter and clinking cups, but at our table, the air felt different, heavier, charged. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected. "You think I don't know what I'm doing. But I do." Her eyes lifted to mine again, and for the briefest second, I saw it, the vulnerability she tried so hard to conceal. It was there in the slight tremble of her lip, and the way her shoulders softened before she caught herself and sat straighter again. She shook her head, almost to herself, then looked back at me with that same guarded smile. "We'll see." But in that moment I knew her warning wasn't meant to drive me away. It was a test, to see if I'd actually stay. I couldn't shake her words. You don't know what you're getting into. They echoed in my mind long after I left the cafe that night. Most people would have taken that as a door closing, a warning to step back before getting pulled into something too complicated. But the truth was, I didn't want to step back. A few days later, we crossed paths again, this time not by chance, but because I found myself hoping I would. She was leaving the cafe just as I was arriving, her coat pulled tight against the wind. For a second, I almost let her walk by, but something in me refused. Wait, I said, reaching out without thinking. My fingers brushed lightly against her sleeve, enough to make her pause. She turned, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of surprise and something harder to read. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her. Her expression shifted, guarded, cautious. And I don't care, I said, the words spilling out faster than I meant them to. I don't care about the warnings, or the age difference, or whatever scars you think will scare me off. You're not complicated in a way that makes me want to run. You're complicated in a way that makes me want to know more. For a moment she just stared at me, the wind tugging strands of her hair across her face. She looked away then, as if the ground suddenly had more answers than I did. I could see her wrestling with herself, the instinct to protect, to push me away, fighting against something softer that she didn't want to admit. I stepped a little closer, lowering my voice. I'm not saying I know everything about you. I don't. But I do know that when I'm around you, the world feels steadier. And I don't want to let that go just because it might be difficult. Her lips parted slightly, as though she had words ready, but none of them made it out. Instead, she took a breath and let it out slowly, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of it. We stood there on the sidewalk, the noise of passing cars filling the silence between us. Finally, I reached for her hand, not grabbing, not demanding, just letting my fingers brush against hers, resting there. I half expected her to pull away. But she didn't. Not right away. Her fingers twitched, caught between retreat and response, before settling still beneath mine. The warmth of her skin was subtle but undeniable, and I felt my chest tighten with the simple fact that she was letting me stay. When she finally looked at me again, there was something different in her eyes. Not surrender, not yet, but a crack in the wall she kept so carefully built. You don't give up easily, do you? She asked, her voice quiet. Not on this, I said. Her gaze lingered on mine for a long moment before she finally pulled her hand back, slipping it into her coat pocket. But she didn't walk away. And in her silence, I found my answer. I was still here. And for now, she was letting me be. The days that followed didn't feel like grand gestures or sweeping moments. Instead, they unfolded in small, ordinary ways that somehow carried more weight than anything dramatic could have. We started walking together after the cafe, not with a destination in mind, but simply because neither of us seemed ready to part ways just yet. She always walked with purpose, her stride confident, but when I was beside her, she slowed just enough that our steps fell in rhythm. It was during one of these walks that we found a small park tucked away from the busy streets. The benches were half empty, the trees beginning to turn amber with the early stretch of autumn. We sat down, close enough that our shoulders brushed. At first, I thought she might shift away, but she didn't. If anything, she seemed to settle into it, her coat's sleeve warm against mine. The silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind that allowed space for breath, for listening to the sound of leaves rustling overhead and the faint laughter of children playing somewhere in the distance. I glanced at her, noticing the way her eyes softened when she watched the world around her, as though she carried a quiet fondness for life's simple things. You always look like you're thinking, I said gently. Her lips curved into a half smile. That's because I usually am. She turned her gaze to me. And you always look like you're searching. The words caught me off guard. Searching? She tilted her head, studying me in that way of hers, measured, careful, but not unkind. Like you're looking for something you haven't quite found yet. I wanted to tell her that maybe I already had, sitting right there beside me. But the words felt too heavy for the moment, so instead I just smiled and said, Maybe I am. A breeze swept through then, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. It stirred her hair across her face, and before I could think twice, I reached out. My fingers brushed lightly against her temple as I tucked the stray strands back behind her ear. It was the simplest gesture, but the world seemed to still in that moment. Her breath caught, so slight I almost missed it, and then she smiled, softer this time, almost shyly. "Thank you?" I nodded, trying to ignore the way my chest tightened at her nearness. Our shoulders remained pressed together, and I could feel her warmth, steady and real, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We sat like that for a long time, speaking little, letting the evening settle around us. The sun dipped lower, painting the park in gold, and for once, time didn't feel like it was racing ahead. It felt patient. Like it was waiting for us. When she finally stood to leave, she didn't walk ahead as she usually did. Instead, she lingered, looking back at me as though she wanted to say something but couldn't quite bring herself to. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushed against mine in a silent goodnight before she turned toward the streetlights. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. And for me, it was enough. It happened on a colder evening, the kind where the air feels sharp and the city lights blur against the night sky. We had returned to the cafe after another quiet walk, and though everything felt familiar, there was something different about her that night. She was quieter, her smile slower to appear. Even the way she held her teacup felt different, tighter, as if she needed the warmth from more than just her hands. I noticed it immediately, the shift, the weight pressing at the edges of her calm. I tried to lighten the mood, telling her a story from my day, something small and inconsequential. She listened, but her eyes kept drifting, her mind somewhere else entirely. Finally, she set her cup down and looked at me, and there was no shield in her gaze this time, only raw honesty. "I shouldn't let this go any further," she said quietly. The words caught me off guard, cutting through the cozy hum of the cafe. My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She took a breath, steadying herself. "You're kind. You're attentive. And I know you mean what you say, but you don't see the whole picture. You don't see how this ends." Her voice wavered just slightly, enough for me to hear the fear beneath the words. "People will talk. They'll question why someone like you would waste your time with someone like me. And one day, you might ask yourself the same thing." Her fingers wrapped tighter around the handle of her cup, knuckles pale. She was bracing herself, waiting for me to argue or, worse, to agree. I leaned in, resting my hand gently over hers. Her skin was cool, trembling faintly beneath my touch. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at me either, her eyes fixed on the swirling tea she'd long forgotten to sip. "You're not a mistake," I said softly. "You could never be that." Her lips pressed together, as though my words only deepened the ache. "You say that now. But time has a way of changing things. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I let you ruin your future because of me." I swallowed hard, the weight of her doubt pressing against me. "You're not ruining anything. If anything, you're giving me something I didn't even know I was searching for." Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something heavier, fear laced with longing. For a moment neither of us spoke. The air between us was charged, tense, filled with everything unsaid. I gave her hand the faintest squeeze, steady, certain. "The only regret I'll have," I whispered, "is if I let you push me away." She drew in a shaky breath, her shoulders softening as though my words had taken some of the weight from her. But still, she hesitated, caught between the safety of retreat and the danger of letting herself believe me. When she finally pulled her hand back, it wasn't abrupt or final. It was slow, reluctant, like someone torn between fear and the quiet desire to stay. And in that hesitation, I saw it clearly, she wanted this as much as I did. She was just afraid to admit it. The night of her warning stayed with me. For days afterward, I replayed the conversation, the way her voice trembled even as she tried to sound firm, the way her hand lingered under mine before she finally pulled away. It would have been easy to see it as rejection. But I didn't. I saw it for what it was, a woman afraid of being wanted, afraid of being let down. And so, I kept showing up. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but simply with presence. A text to ask if she'd like tea. A walk through the park when the air was crisp and the leaves crunched beneath our shoes. Sitting across from her in comfortable silence, proving with every small moment that I wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of gold and deep violet, we found ourselves back at the park. The air carried the faint chill of early winter, our breath visible in the fading light. She walked beside me, her coat buttoned up, her hair catching the last rays of the sun. I noticed her hands tucked into her pockets, and without thinking, I let my arm brush gently against hers. This time, she didn't shift away. We stopped near a bench where we'd once sat shoulder to shoulder, the memory of that quiet intimacy lingering like a promise. She looked out toward the trees, her profile outlined by the dimming light, and after a long silence she said, "I keep waiting for you to change your mind." I turned to her, letting the honesty in my voice carry. "And I keep waiting for you to believe that I won't." Her lips curved, but faintly, almost reluctant. She drew in a breath, as though she was standing on the edge of something uncertain. Then, slowly, she reached out and let her hands slip into mine. Her fingers were cool at first, tentative, but when I closed my hand gently around hers, she didn't pull back. Instead, she exhaled softly, as if releasing a tension she'd carried for far too long. We walked like that, hand in hand, and it felt different this time, less like an accident, more like a choice. Her thumb brushed across my knuckles once, absent-mindedly, but the small gesture sent a quiet warmth through me that settled deep in my chest. For the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't warning me away. She wasn't hiding behind careful smiles or guarded pauses. She was letting me stay. As we made our way down the path, the last of the sunlight painting everything in shades of gold, she leaned lightly against my arm. No words, no explanations, just the quiet acceptance of something real beginning. I didn't need her to say she believed me. I could feel it in the way her hand lingered in mine, in the way her steps matched mine with ease. And in that moment I knew I hadn't just stayed. She had, too.